The year is 1991. Terminator 2 had audiences gasping in awe at its technical prowess. Disney released Beauty and the Beast to huge critical acclaim, while Silence of the Lambs released but featured no actual lambs. Gamers in North America were just getting their hands on Super Nintendo, and the 16-bit gaming wars were about to fully commence. PC gaming was still the reserve of enthusiasts, but a number of hugely important titles would release in 1991. These include the likes of Sid Meier's Civilization, Space Quest 4, Roger Wilco, and Lemmings. The newly formed id Software was slowly finding their feet, with John Carmack, John Romero, Tom Hall, and Adrian Carmack already beginning to feel ambitious. They began planting the seeds for their future success. The result of this work was their first FPS outing, a game that wouldn't receive huge critical acclaim or break sales records upon its release, but is cited as a crucial moment in setting the course for everything which followed. It's a game that, when viewed through modern eyes, is very basic, however its importance in the development of first-person shooters cannot be understated. That game is Hovertank One. Back in 1990, most of the members of the team, which would eventually become id Software, worked under the Softdisk label, mostly releasing smaller games via Gamer's Edge, a bi-monthly magazine which came bundled with various games on a floppy disk. John Romero released a number of his own produced games via this method, including the likes of Dangerous Dave and Substalker. Carmack released Dark Designs and Catacomb. Quickly though, John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, Lane Roth, John Romero and Tom Hall started pooling their resources and worked on the original Commander Keen game in their own time, crucially to this story, using Softdisk computers over weekends to develop that game. They released the shareware version of this under Apogee Software in December of 1990, without any notice to Softdisk that any of this was about to go down. This did not go down well at all. With the threat of legal action from Softdisk owner Al Vicovius very real, the fledgling team found themselves cutting a deal to continue developing games for the Gamer's Edge brand under the newly minted id Software banner through 1991 to 1993. This deal not only saved the team from litigation, but it also gave them the opportunity to develop new engines, test out various ideas, and slowly form the focus that would define the studio's output. The likes of Dangerous Dave in the Haunted House, Shadow Knights, Tales of the Dragon, and Rescue Rover were developed under the id Software team. These are smaller focused offerings that ranged from puzzle games to smaller experimental outings. Perhaps though there wasn't a bigger foreshadow of where the team was heading than with its 1991 offering, Hovertank One. John Carmack developed the engine for Hovertank One over a 6-week period. A quick sidebar here, I'm going to be referring to this game as Hovertank from here on out. The game is known by several titles, and they all basically mean the same offerings, just some of them have more levels. Carmack mentioned his efforts in developing the engine for the game during an interview with Shack News, where he also revealed he still hadn't worked out some of the issues before releasing the game. But it had the basic information about transforms and clipping and line drawing and things like that. It's a big fat book, and that was my bible for years, where I just read and read it and read it. And I didn't understand everything that was in it, but it was enough to give me some directions to explore. That was what I used to create Hovertank. I remember pushing hard through it and not quite making it in time, and things were not quite working as well as they should, and going a little over time and budget. The simplest thing we did in Hovertank was the walls were still solid, flat, shaded, partially for performance reasons, and partially because I honestly still hadn't worked out issues with perspective texture mapping. That was obviously the next big thing that I wanted to do with Catacomb 3D. Romero stated that John Carmack put a lot of work into developing the engine. He was up all the time. If he was awake, he was coding and eating. The engine that Carmack did develop pioneered the use of raycasting and formed the basis for the advancements made in Catacomb 3D's engine and eventually Wolfenstein 3D. Adrian Carmack commented that Hovertank allowed things to happen that weren't possible in other 3D games at the time. That was the first game I'd ever seen where you could actually just freely move around a room and attack enemies. Usually they were just step by step, slow and plodding, but that was the technology at the time. The team at id Software made the decision to set Hovertank during a nuclear war. This allowed them to make use of mutated enemies and also allowed for humans to be saved during missions, or killed if you're feeling particularly nasty. It's been stated that Adrian Carmack had a blast, no pun intended, designing the enemies and ghouls that the player would encounter in the game. The game would feature in-game sound effects but does not feature any kind of background music to accompany gameplay. Small voice clips are used at various points to help add character to the outing. What set the engine apart from anything else on PC at the time was that the game ran very fast. Compared to other 3D offerings released around the same time, Hovertank has a more fluid feel to it that keeps the action moving at a somewhat brisk pace. Other games had similar engines and allowed for more details in their worlds, the likes of Alpha Wave and flight simulators, but they were notably worse performers. It is sometimes incorrectly stated that Hovertank was the first 3D DOS game. However, Microsoft Flight Simulator beat it to that honour by several years. It is also not the first FPS game ever created. That honour goes to 1973's Maze War, which was developed in a NASA work-study program. Tom Hall fleshed out the story of the game through in-game text blurbs, which appear during and after each mission, setting the stage for the next level and attempting to create a cohesive story. Tom Hall actually mentioned in interviews how excited he was to be making levels for these early games, stating, "It was amazing and an honour to design the very first-person shooter levels, whether you consider that to be Hovertank, Catacomb 3D or Wolfenstein 3D. That was a completely new problem and design language that needed inventing. Some things worked, some things needed refining, but that's the process of game development and learning your craft, especially in a new unexplored design space." The game would be bundled in Gamer's Edge's April 1991 magazine release and was made for the DOS platform. Hovertank is a very interesting experience for those who venture back to see it in action. It's very clear this comes from a very different era of gaming, one where the final product is more of a technical showpiece than an outright solid gaming experience. Your mileage with it really comes down to how much you're willing to accept that fact. So rather than guiding you through a retrospective which points to issues and then discusses them like I normally would do, I feel it's more appropriate to do a guided showcase of this game, explaining where it has potential, which can be built upon, and other areas where I think things don't work quite as well. I feel this is more appropriate for a game like this, which wasn't a full retail offering, but instead more of a technical showcase. It's important to state that each of the levels begins the exact same way. You're given a text blurb and then you are teleported into the level itself. These levels are very basic, very rudimentary. There is not much going on outside of these single coloured walls, but your objective is to go around and find these civilians. Each of the levels does explain the scenario that you're entering, however, none of the scenarios genuinely affect the gameplay experience. They're all kind of done to add story to the experience. One thing you will immediately notice is that there is no background music. This game does not feature that in any form. You do get the occasional background noise. Sometimes it's the sound of your tank backfiring. Sometimes it's the civilians joyously screaming yay as you try to save them. And sometimes it's the enemy noises. That is pretty much the extent to which you will hear sounds in this game. I'll let you have a little listen to that sort of ambience just so you can get an idea for what is going on here.
Gate detected.
When you've successfully saved all the people in the level, or they're not around anymore, this portal opens up and this takes you out of the level. And when you've finished the level, you get to this screen here where your score is tallied up, the number of people that you save gives you a higher score, and the amount of time left also gives you more. You also get a text blurb for the next level, which is pretty interesting, although as said, none of this really affects the overall gameplay. Now, it should be noted that as you kind of advance through the 20 levels on offer in this complete package, if you're playing Hovercraft 3D, now of course, it has to be said very clearly, this is very basic and the visual appeal of this one quickly begins to lose its charm. They've tried to differentiate different areas using different sorts of colors. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that well. These levels are mazes. Enemies don't really stand still. They'll wander around and you have to refer to that map in the bottom right-hand corner if you want to know what's around a corner. If you see a red dot, it means it's an enemy. If it's blue, it means it's a health or armor pickup. And if you see a white dot, that means it's a hostage. Unfortunately, there is no real way to avoid the situation where enemies can sort of spring you at times. So it means that you have to be incredibly careful as you're going around some of these corners, because it means that enemies can wander into you with little or no warning at all. In terms of the actual view frame here, you can see that the game has a big HUD at the bottom, and that gives you all the information that you kind of need. It tells you about the area that you are in, the time left. It shows you how much armor you have. Green is the top, yellow means you've been hit once, red means you're going to blow up on the next one, and then you just get blown up. Unfortunately, there really isn't that much use for the money that you're collecting. That really just serves as a high score. And at the end of each level, your damage will be repaired and taken from the high score amount. So it's one of those situations where you're never really going to be out of money because the game doesn't really punish you that deeply. As you can see, it's all being tallied up, and then we get kicked to the next section. And that's basically the gameplay loop on offer here. I do appreciate the fact that they've tried to lean into the tank aesthetic. The bobbling that the tank does as you kind of move around, it does feel a bit like you're wandering around on a balloon, I would say. And I have seen people say that they have got motion sick playing this for extended periods of time. So you do kind of need to be a bit aware of that. And as you saw there, sometimes the enemies will just murder the humans if they find them before you do. So this really is like a big game of hide and seek. As you can see there, that enemy kind of wandered around the corner there. I didn't really have much chance to get rid of it. This is effectively the game, and some of the later levels get really complicated in the layout. The labyrinth sort of exploration required in this game, it really does test your patience as you move through the levels. Luckily, you can skip to the final levels if you really want to. You're not forced to play from the start. But I would say that if you play the first like 5-10 levels, you've basically seen the best of this game. The lack of variety in the levels, while expected for what this is, it does hamper the long-term enjoyment of it. And I do feel that the lack of variety in mission objectives, it does kind of rob the experience a little bit of replay value. It does make some interesting noises though. I like the use of the voice clips as well. It does kind of add something to the experience. There are several different types of enemies that you can encounter. The tanks are by far the most frustrating enemies that you'll encounter, purely because they can shoot projectiles at you in a straight line. And the problem is, as you can see there, sometimes you will turn a corner and you won't even know they're there until they've already taken a shot at you, which makes the rest of the level even more frustrating. I think that the map as well is barely functional as an item. Unfortunately, one of the problems with the maze-like level design here is that the white dots can appear really close to you, but the route to getting to them can be very opaque, requiring you to go all the way around. As you can see there, when you do run out of health, you get this sort of nuclear explosion screen, and you get your score tallied up. I've jumped ahead a bit here to the 18th area, and if you look at the map there, you can see there's a lot going on, and there isn't really much context for the player to kind of work out what's going on. You're basically required to fumble around and deal with what's going on. There are several enemy types, like I said, and they all kind of behave in very similar ways. None of them really do anything too interesting, but the tanks by far are probably the most frustrating enemies. Overall though, I think that it's very hard to be too critical of this one. I feel that the decision to make it a tank-based game really makes sense when you consider the context of what this game was trying to achieve, and the fact that there wasn't really that many games on PC around this time trying to do this. It's pretty important from a historical context. And unlike Wolfenstein 3D, I would say that this one is a very difficult revisit, even for people who are super into old school games. This game really is more of a technical showpiece, and it was very quickly superseded by Catacomb 3D, which came out not long after this. And I feel that that actually is a bit more playable in terms of enjoyment. It's not too far ahead of this game, but I feel that the refinements it made in the short times after the release, it genuinely is like a big leap in quality, and you can feel it in the way that the games are executed. But I'm not going to say too much bad about this one. That one of the reasons I'm not doing this as a normal retrospect, like I normally would critically analyze, is because I don't think there's much need for that here. This game, as you can see, it's got the bare bones of what Wolfenstein 3D would eventually become. It really has that sort of Wolfenstein very early feel about it, and in a historical sense, I genuinely appreciate what this does. Oh yeah, this you have afterburners which you can use to get around quickly. Unfortunately, it makes this very irritating noise in the background, which a bit frustrating, a bit, I don't like using it because it's a very grating sound. And no, there are no other weapons. You can't pick up other weapons to power yourself up in this one. There's no power-ups to pick up. You're basically using just the tank bullets and that massive crosshair in the center of the screen. But again, I'm not being overly critical of this one. It has been fun to come back and revisit this because I have never actually played this game, and you can feel what this is going to become. The importance of this in 1991 cannot be understated. And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't really get to experience it at the time. A lot of people only got to experience it when it was bundled in with the Lost id Software games collection, which obviously came after Wolfenstein 3D. So this game really didn't get the moment to shine in the sun. But I think from a historical sense, it's important to acknowledge that this game happened and that this was a stepping stone to much greater things. You can also kill the hostages if you really, really want to, if you're feeling particularly devilish. You can see here, like, you have to sort of pay attention when you're exploring these levels because you can get a bit lost. While Hovertank would quickly be superseded by other id Software developed offerings, there's no denying how hugely important this game was in the roadmap of id Software. It's clear that this is the very bare bones of what would come in the likes of Catacomb 3D and Wolfenstein 3D. The DNA is forming right there in front of you. Hovertank would be bundled together with various other id Software developed soft disk offerings in a 10-game compilation called the Lost Collection of id Software. This was sold as id Software's star rose after releasing Wolfenstein 3D. The game's source code would be released officially by Flat Rock Software, who would end up as the owners of that code through various acquisitions and exchanges in 2014. Hovertank is considered a hugely important stepping stone for the development of first-person shooters as a genre, and its historical value is very much noted. Unfortunately, there is no legal way for gamers to acquire the game for themselves at the time of writing. The game has never been released to notable digital storefronts like GOG or Steam. It's not clear who owns the rights to the game at this point, and I would suspect it's unlikely to ever make an appearance. It is possible to acquire the game through various means. The game is also playable by various websites which make use of DOSBox and allow you to play the game on their websites. I would personally recommend this if you're curious but don't really want to dabble with the technical side of things. The legacy of Hovertank is arguably much more important than the game itself. The sad fact is that this game was superseded very quickly by Catacomb 3D, which released just months later. The team at id Software were moving so quickly with the development of their engines that they were able to move beyond this game very fast. It means that even back in the day, Hovertank aged pretty quickly for gamers. It being tied to a magazine floppy disk also limited its availability, meaning that many people didn't get to experience it until many years later. I think returning to play this though has been a positive experience for me. It's a very quirky moment in id Software's history, one that's often overlooked and forgotten, but it's worthy of being discussed. The importance of this game can't be understated, and the ambition from id Software as a team is clearly on show here. It's definitely a fun moment from the id Software back catalogue. But as mentioned, id Software were blazing the path in front of them, and they didn't have time to rest on their laurels. Before long, they'd release Catacomb 3D, and once again, they'd get people talking in a very positive way.